Before the entire moon goddess and every wolf clan standing in this hall, I, Kael Varen, the Alpha King of the Northern Crescent Pack, reject you as my destined mate, and tear away the bond that connects your soul to mine forever. The moment those cruel words echoed through the ancient royal hall, silence swallowed the entire kingdom. Thousands of wolves froze beneath the towering silver pillars, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. The sacred mate bond. The blessing believed to be protected by the moon goddess herself was being destroyed by the very Alpha King who had once sworn to protect it. Aria Vale stood in the center of the hall, her face pale, her silver eyes filled with unbearable pain, yet she refused to fall before the man who had broken her heart. Stay with this story, because the truth behind this betrayal will change everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and destiny. The Grand Hall of the Northern Crescent Pack had never witnessed such a horrifying scene. The flames of the ancient torches flickered against the cold stone walls as the nobles, warriors, and elders watched the woman who had once been called their future Luna being dragged before the throne like a criminal. Aria's wrists were bound with enchanted chains, but the chains were not what made her weak. The real wound was the invisible one burning inside her chest, the place where her bond with Kael had once existed. Every wolf knew that a mate bond was more than a promise. It was a connection between two souls chosen by the moon goddess. To destroy it meant tearing apart something sacred. Yet Kael stood above her with a cold expression, his golden eyes showing no trace of the man who had once held her beneath the moonlight and promised that no one would ever hurt her. Beside the Alpha King stood Celine Ravel, the woman who had replaced Aria in the eyes of the court. She wore a magnificent black and silver gown decorated with jewels from the royal treasury, while a satisfied smile rested on her lips. The same nobles who had once whispered that Aria was blessed by destiny now bowed respectfully towards Celine, pretending they had never celebrated Aria's arrival as their future Luna. The betrayal was not only from Kael. It came from an entire kingdom that had quickly turned its back on the woman who had sacrificed everything for them. Aria looked around the hall and saw familiar faces refusing to meet her eyes, including warriors whose lives she had saved during countless battles. She finally understood that the cruelest wounds were not created by enemies standing outside the gates, but by those who had once stood beside her and called her family. Kael descended the throne steps slowly, each movement filled with the authority of an alpha who controlled thousands of wolves. Years ago, Aria would have searched his face for a sign of hesitation, hoping to discover that this was only a nightmare. But now she saw something different. She saw a man who had convinced himself that destroying her was necessary. "You were never worthy of standing beside me," Kael declared before the entire court, accusing her of betraying the kingdom and secretly working with enemy clans. His voice was powerful, but Aria noticed something hidden beneath his anger. For a brief moment, his eyes trembled when they met hers, as if a part of him was screaming that everything happening was wrong. But that hesitation disappeared when Celine stepped closer and whispered something only he could hear. The Alpha King turned away from Aria, choosing the throne over the woman who had once been his heart. The elders announced that Aria's punishment would be exile beyond the Black Wolf Valley, a cursed land where even experienced warriors rarely survived. The place was known as the Land of Forgotten Souls, where storms never stopped and ancient beasts hunted those who entered. Everyone understood what the order truly meant. Kael was not simply sending her away. He was sending her to die. A murmur spread through the crowd, but no one dared challenge the Alpha King's command. Aria remained silent as the guards prepared to take her away. She could have screamed, she could have revealed every secret she knew, and she could have begged Kael to remember the love they once shared. Instead, she lowered her head and accepted the judgment with a dignity that made even some of her enemies uncomfortable. The woman they expected to break was standing there stronger than anyone in the room. As Aria turned toward the entrance of the hall, something unexpected happened. The silver mark on her shoulder, a symbol she had hidden since childhood, suddenly began glowing beneath her torn clothing. The entire palace fell silent as a strange wave of ancient energy spread through the room. The moon priestess, who had remained motionless beside the elders, suddenly stepped forward with a shocked expression. For the first time in decades, the elderly woman who had served the moon goddess showed fear. "That mark? It cannot be possible," she whispered, but she quickly stopped herself before revealing more. Kale looked back at Aria, his face changing for only a second, while Celine's confident expression disappeared completely. Something about Aria was not what they believed. Something hidden for generations had awakened, and the people who wanted her dead had just realized they might have made the greatest mistake in the history of the Wolf Kingdoms. Before the guards could remove her, Aria looked at Kale one final time. She remembered the night they first met, the night he held her trembling hands after she saved him from an enemy attack. She remembered his promise beneath the full moon when he told her that even the entire world standing against them would never separate their souls. Those memories felt like another lifetime now. "I never betrayed you," Aria finally said, her voice quiet but strong enough for the entire hall to hear. "One day you will learn that the person you destroyed was the only person who would have protected you." Her words did not contain anger. They carried something much more powerful: certainty. Kyle wanted to believe she was manipulating him, but deep inside the Alpha King felt a fear he could not explain. For the first time he wondered whether he had condemned the wrong person. The gates of the royal fortress opened beneath a dark and endless sky as Aria was forced onto the road of exile. Snow covered the ancient path leading toward the Black Wolf Valley, and every step took her farther away from the life she had known. The woman who entered that road was not the same woman who had arrived at the palace years earlier, hoping to find acceptance. She had entered the royal world believing kindness could change hearts, believing loyalty would always be rewarded, and believing the mate bond was stronger than any ambition. Now she understood that love without trust could become another prison. As the cold wind surrounded her, Aria touched the empty space in her soul where Kyle's bond had been. She felt pain, but beneath that pain was something else growing, a strength she had never needed before. The world believed her story had ended, but the moon goddess had not finished writing her fate. Far away from the northern crescent pack, hidden beneath forgotten mountains and ancient forests, a different power began to awaken. The Lycan Empire, a kingdom feared by every wolf clan, received news about the Alpha King's decision. Its ruler, Raven Draven, the legendary Lycan Emperor known as the Beast Without Mercy, listened silently as his advisors reported the exile of the woman carrying the mysterious moon mark. Unlike the others, Raven did not laugh or celebrate Aria's downfall. Instead, he stared toward the distant northern horizon, feeling something he had never experienced before. The moon goddess had moved a piece on the great board of destiny, and the strongest ruler in the world knew that the woman everyone had abandoned might hold the secret that could change all kingdoms forever. Meanwhile, Aria walked deeper into the darkness, unaware that her greatest tragedy was also the beginning of her rebirth. Years before the day of betrayal, before the broken bond and the road toward death, Aria Vale was only known as the daughter of a small border family that served the Northern Crescent Pack. Her bloodline carried no wealth, no powerful army, and no respected name among the noble houses. From childhood, she learned that kindness was often mistaken for weakness, and that those without status were expected to remain invisible. Yet Aria possessed something rare, a heart that refused to become cruel even when the world treated her unfairly. She spent her days helping injured wolves, protecting villages from danger, and training herself in secret because she knew someone from a small family could only survive through determination. She never dreamed of becoming Luna. She never imagined sitting beside an Alpha King, but destiny had already chosen a path for her, one that would bring her the greatest love of her life before leading her toward the deepest betrayal. It was during a violent border conflict that Aria first crossed paths with Kyle Varen, the future Alpha King, who was known across the territories as a ruthless warrior. At that time, Kale believed power was the only language enemies understood. He trusted his claws, his army, and his authority, but he trusted almost no one with his heart. When an ambush left him injured and separated from his warriors, it was Aria who found him among the ruins of an abandoned village. She did not know his identity at first. She did not see a throne or a crown. She only saw a wounded wolf who needed help. That simple act of compassion would become the beginning of a bond that would shake the foundations of every wolf kingdom. Yet neither of them knew that powerful forces were already preparing to destroy the connection the moon goddess had created between their souls. Aria never imagined that saving a wounded stranger in the middle of a forgotten battlefield would one day place her at the center of a war for power, love, and survival. When she discovered that the man she had rescued was not an ordinary warrior, But Kael Varen, the alpha heir of the Northern Crescent Pack, she expected him to return to his world and forget the small border girl who had offered him shelter. She had no desire for royal attention, no ambition to stand beside an alpha king, and no dream of becoming a Luna worshipped by thousands. But destiny had already chosen differently. The moment Kael looked into her silver eyes beneath the cold moonlight, both of them felt something impossible to ignore. A powerful connection awakened between their souls, and the mark of the moon goddess appeared, announcing what every wolf feared and respected: they were destined mates. The news spread across the kingdom faster than any battle report. Some celebrated because they believed the moon goddess had finally blessed their future king with his true Luna. Others reacted with anger because Aria was not born into one of the great noble families. The royal court had always believed that the Luna of the Northern Crescent Pack should come from a powerful bloodline, someone who could strengthen political alliances and increase the influence of the kingdom. To them, Aria was nothing more than a village girl who had been lucky enough to catch the attention of an alpha. During the first royal gathering after their bond was revealed, whispers followed her everywhere. The nobles looked at her simple dress, her humble manners, and her lack of royal education, judging her before she had spoken a single word. Aria felt every insult, but she refused to let their cruelty change who she was. Kael noticed the way the court treated her, and at first he defended her with the strength of an alpha. When an elder questioned whether a woman from a border family could ever lead the pack, Kael stood before the entire council and declared that the moon goddess did not choose partners based on wealth or titles. He believed Aria's kindness, courage, and loyalty were worth more than any royal heritage. Those words made Aria believe that perhaps she had finally found someone who saw her true worth. For the first time in her life, she felt accepted. Kael showed her a world beyond the small village where she had grown up, and Aria showed him something he had forgotten: that a ruler who protected his people needed compassion as much as strength. Their relationship became the hope of many common wolves who had always felt ignored by the powerful families. Aria traveled through villages, healed injured warriors, listened to the struggles of ordinary wolves, and earned respect not through her title but through her actions. Even those who once doubted her began to admit that she possessed the qualities of a true Luna. However, the higher her reputation grew, the more dangerous she became to those who wanted control over Kael and the throne. A Luna loved by the people was not someone easily manipulated. There were those who needed a weaker woman beside the Alpha King, someone who would obey rather than inspire. Among those people was Celine Ravel, the daughter of one of the most influential families in the kingdom. For years, Celine had been prepared to become Kael's mate through a political arrangement between powerful clans. She believed her beauty status and family influence guaranteed her place beside the throne. When the moon goddess chose Aria instead, Celine considered it not only a personal humiliation but a threat to everything she had spent her life building. She did not hate Aria because of love alone. She hated her because Aria represented something Celine could never possess: the genuine loyalty of the people. While Celine could command respect through fear and wealth, Aria gained it through sacrifice. Slowly, Celine began planting doubts inside the palace. She never attacked Aria directly because she knew open conflict would make her look jealous. Instead, she used careful words, false concern, and hidden manipulation. She told the elders that Aria was too inexperienced to understand royal responsibility. She suggested that enemy clans might use Aria's humble background to infiltrate the kingdom. She spread rumors that the moon goddess mark was not a blessing, but a sign of an ancient curse. Every lie was small enough to appear harmless, but together they created a shadow that slowly surrounded Aria. At first, Kael ignored the rumors. He trusted Aria and believed their bond was stronger than political games. But the pressure of ruling thousands of wolves began changing him. Every decision he made affected the survival of his kingdom. Every mistake could lead to war. The elders constantly reminded him that an alpha king could not rule only with his heart. They told him that love was a weakness enemies could exploit. Slowly, the man who once promised to stand against the world for Aria began carrying doubts he refused to admit. The first major crack appeared during a diplomatic meeting with a rival wolf clan. A secret message was discovered claiming that someone inside the Northern Crescent Pack had provided enemy forces with information about military defenses. The evidence seemed to point toward Aria, because the message had been found among documents connected to her family territory. The entire court demanded an investigation. Aria was shocked because she knew she had done nothing wrong. She looked toward Kale, expecting him to immediately defend her, but instead she saw hesitation in his eyes. That hesitation hurt more than the accusation itself. "Kale, you know me," Aria said quietly after the meeting ended, standing alone with him beneath the royal balcony where they once watched the stars together. "You know my heart. You know I would rather die protecting this kingdom than betray it." Her voice carried no anger, only sadness. Kale wanted to believe her completely, but the weight of his crown made him silent. He told her that he needed time to discover the truth. Those words, although reasonable to him, became the first moment when Aria felt the distance growing between them. She did not know that the evidence against her had been carefully created. She did not know that the same people questioning her loyalty were the ones who feared her becoming the most powerful Luna in generations. She only knew that the man who once held her hand, whenever the world rejected her, had started looking at her like a stranger. Still, Aria continued serving the kingdom because she believed truth would eventually reveal itself. She refused to become bitter. She refused to fight cruelty with cruelty. But someone was watching her patience as a weakness. Deep beneath the royal fortress, hidden within an ancient chamber forgotten by most of the kingdom, a group of elders gathered around old manuscripts and forbidden symbols. They were not loyal to the kingdom. They were loyal only to power. They believed the ancient prophecy of the moon mark threatened the balance they had controlled for generations. According to the forgotten writings, a Luna carrying the silver mark would unite the divided wolf nations and end the rule of corrupt bloodlines. To them, Aria was not merely a woman standing beside the Alpha King. She was the beginning of a new era they desperately wanted to prevent. The most dangerous secret was that Aria's true identity was connected to a lost royal bloodline that disappeared decades ago. Her family believed they were ordinary border wolves, but the truth had been hidden from them for generations. The moon goddess had protected that secret until the right moment arrived. If Aria discovered who she truly was, she would no longer be someone the nobles could easily destroy. She would become someone capable of challenging every powerful family in the wolf world. And that was why they needed her gone. As the seasons changed, Aria felt herself becoming increasingly isolated inside the palace she once hoped would become her home. The same walls that had witnessed her happiness now echoed with whispers against her. The same warriors who once praised her courage now avoided her gaze. Even Kale, although still caring for her in moments when no one watched, became colder in public. He was trapped between the woman he loved and the throne he believed he had to protect. One night, while walking through the palace gardens beneath the full moon, Aria discovered something strange near the ancient fountain. Hidden beneath the stone's surface was a symbol identical to the mark on her shoulder. The discovery shocked her, because no one outside her family should have known about it. Before she could investigate further, the symbol disappeared, leaving only a single sentence carved into the stone. "The one who loses everything will awaken what was always hers." Aria did not understand the meaning at that time. She did not know that those words were not a warning of her destruction, but a prophecy of her rebirth. Because soon the kingdom would witness the fall of the woman they underestimated. And years later, when Aria returned from exile beside the most feared ruler in the world, every person who had looked down on her would remember the moment they chose to destroy the wrong woman. The road toward the Black Wolf Valley was a road where even the bravest warriors feared to walk. For generations, the cursed land had been known as the graveyard of those who had been abandoned by their own clans. No villages existed there. No hunters dared enter its forests, and no wolf wanted to hear the terrifying stories whispered about the creatures that lived beneath the endless darkness. Yet Aria Vale walked toward that place alone, carrying nothing except torn clothes, a wounded heart, and the unbearable memory of the man who had destroyed the bond between their souls. The kingdom believed they had sent a traitor to her death. They believed the story of Luna Aria had ended the moment Alpha King Kale ripped away their mate bond before the entire court, but they were wrong. The moon goddess had not allowed her chosen one to disappear. She had only removed her from a world that never deserved her. For 3 days and 3 nights, Aria wandered through the frozen wilderness without knowing where she was going. The magical chains around her wrists had disappeared after she crossed the border of the Northern Crescent territory, but the pain inside her remained. Every breath reminded her of what she had lost. The connection she once felt with Kale was gone, leaving behind an emptiness that felt almost unnatural. A mate bond was not simply love. It was a bridge between two souls. Losing it was like losing a part of herself. There were moments when she wanted to collapse into the snow and surrender to the cold moments when she wondered if the world would truly be better without her. But every time those thoughts appeared, she remembered the faces of the innocent wolves. She had protected the villagers who had believed in her and the promise she had made to herself that she would never allow cruel people to decide her worth. The first night inside the cursed forest was the hardest. The trees surrounding her seemed alive, their ancient branches twisting beneath the silver moonlight, like silent watchers. Strange sounds echoed between the mountains, and the air carried a dark energy unlike anything Aria had ever felt. She understood why no one survived this place. It was not only because of the dangerous creatures hiding within the shadows. It was because the land itself seemed designed to break the spirit of anyone who entered. But something unexpected happened when Aria reached the center of the forest. The silver mark on her shoulder began glowing again, brighter than it ever had before. The darkness around her slowly disappeared, and a hidden path appeared beneath the snow, leading toward a place that should not have existed. At the end of that path stood an ancient temple covered by centuries of forgotten history. Aria entered cautiously, believing she had discovered a ruin left behind by the old wolf clans. But inside the temple she found something impossible. The walls were decorated with carvings of the moon goddess, and among those carvings was the image of a woman who looked exactly like her. The same silver eyes, the same mark upon her shoulder, the same expression of quiet strength. Aria stood frozen, unable to understand what she was seeing. Her entire life, she had believed her family was ordinary. She had believed she was simply a border wolf who had been chosen by fate. But the temple told a different story. Before she could discover more, a deep voice echoed through the darkness. "You should not have survived the journey here." Aria immediately turned around, ready to defend herself despite her exhaustion. Standing at the entrance of the temple was a man unlike anyone she had ever seen. He was tall, powerful, and carried an overwhelming presence that made the entire room feel smaller. His black hair fell over his shoulders, his silver eyes reflected the same cold light as the moon, and his expression showed no emotion. Even without knowing his identity, Aria understood one thing clearly. This man was dangerous. I was not a common wolf. He was something far more powerful. The stranger stepped forward slowly, and the ancient symbols on the temple walls began glowing around him. Aria tightened her fist, preparing for an attack. She had already trusted one powerful man once, and that trust had almost destroyed her. She would not make the same mistake again. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man looked at the glowing mark on her shoulder before answering. "Raven Draven, Emperor of the Lycan Empire." The name alone carried enough weight to silence kingdoms. The Lycan Empire was not just another wolf territory. It was an ancient power that existed long before the current Alpha kingdoms were created. Lycans were stronger, faster, and feared because of their connection to ancient bloodlines. Their ruler, Raven Draven, had earned a terrifying reputation. Enemies called him a monster because he showed no mercy in battle. Some stories claimed he had no heart, no emotions, and no weakness. Others believed he was cursed by the moon goddess herself. Aria looked at him carefully, refusing to show fear. "If you are the Lycan Emperor, why are you here?" Raven's expression remained calm, but his eyes revealed that he already knew more about her than he should. "Because I have been searching for the owner of that mark for many years." Those words made Aria step back. "What mark?" Raven looked toward the symbol on her shoulder. "The mark that belongs to the last bloodline of the original moon Luna." For a moment, Aria forgot how to breathe. She had spent her entire life being told that she was insignificant, a girl from a small family, a woman who was not worthy of standing beside an Alpha king. Yet this powerful ruler was looking at her as if she carried something that could change the world. "I think you have mistaken me for someone else," Aria said quietly. "I am nobody." Something changed in Raven's expression when he heard those words. Not anger, not pity, something closer to sadness. "That is what they wanted you to believe." The answer shook her. Raven explained that decades ago, an ancient royal family connected directly to the moon goddess disappeared during a mysterious massacre. The official story claimed every member of that bloodline had died. But hidden records suggested that one child survived and was taken away from the royal world to protect her from those who wanted the power of her blood. The child grew up without knowing her true identity, protected by people who sacrificed their lives to hide her existence. Aria listened silently, unable to accept what she was hearing. "My parents never told me anything about this. Because they were protecting you," Raven replied. "Then why now?" The Lycan Emperor looked toward the moon shining through the broken ceiling of the temple. "Because the moment your mate bond was destroyed, the protection around your bloodline disappeared." Aria felt a cold wave pass through her body. The destruction of her bond with Kale was not only a personal betrayal. It was the key that awakened something ancient. Raven continued explaining that the moon goddess had created a prophecy centuries ago. A woman carrying the silver mark would one day unite the divided kingdoms and bring balance between wolves and Lycans. But before that could happen, she would experience the greatest betrayal of her life. She would lose everything she believed in, including the love she thought would last forever. Aria's heart tightened. The prophecy described her. She had lost her home. She had lost her title. She had lost Kyle. But she refused to believe that her suffering had a purpose. "Why should I care about a prophecy?" Aria whispered. "A prophecy did not save me when the man I loved destroyed me." For the first time, Raven's cold expression softened. "No," he said quietly, "but it brought you here." Those words stayed in Aria's mind. Because for the first time since her exile, someone was not looking at her as a traitor. Someone was looking at her as someone worth protecting. However, Aria did not trust easily anymore. She had learned that beautiful promises could hide painful betrayals. She did not know whether Raven was truly her savior or another powerful person who wanted to use her. And Raven seemed to understand her fear. "I will not ask you to trust me," he said. "Trust is something you lost because someone else broke it. I will only give you time to discover the truth." That answer surprised Aria more than any declaration could have, because Kyle had demanded her loyalty. Raven offered her a choice, and that difference would slowly change everything. As the night continued, the two rulers stood beneath the ancient temple, unaware that far away in the northern Crescent Kingdom news of Aria's survival had already reached the royal palace. And the Alpha King, who once believed he had erased his Luna from existence, was about to learn that the woman he sent to die had been found by the most powerful ruler alive. The woman he destroyed was no longer alone. She had been found by an emperor, and destiny had only begun to turn. In the following days, Aria remained inside the ancient moon temple under the protection of the Lycan Emperor, but she refused to accept the comfort of a palace or the kindness of strangers. Her heart had learned a painful lesson. The same people who promised to protect her had been the ones who destroyed her. So when Raven offered her a room inside the Lycan fortress, she chose instead to stay near the temple, sleeping beside cold stone walls and studying the forgotten writings left behind by the ancient Luna bloodline. She wanted answers more than luxury. She wanted to understand why her entire life had been shaped by secrets she never knew existed. Every symbol on the walls, every ancient record, and every hidden message seemed to reveal pieces of a story that had been intentionally buried for generations. Raven watched her from a distance, never forcing his presence upon her. This surprised Aria because she had expected a ruler like him to demand obedience. Every powerful man she had known before believed authority gave them the right to control others. Kale had been an alpha king who expected trust because of their bond. The elders had expected submission because of tradition, but Raven was different. He was feared by entire kingdoms, yet he never treated Aria like a possession or a weapon. He treated her like a person whose choices mattered. That difference confused her more than cruelty ever had. She had prepared herself to fight against another enemy, but she was not prepared to face someone who showed kindness without asking for anything in return. One evening, while examining an ancient manuscript, Aria discovered a passage written in an old language used by the first moon priestesses. The words described a Luna who would lose her first bond but gain a second chance through a union chosen by destiny rather than obligation. At first, Aria thought the message was another part of the prophecy surrounding her, but one line caught her attention. "The heart broken by betrayal shall not be healed by forgetting the past, but by finding someone who sees the soul beneath the scars." She stared at those words for a long time because they described exactly what she had experienced. She did not want revenge. She did not want to become powerful just to make others suffer. Deep inside, she only wanted to know that her existence had meaning beyond the pain others had caused her. Meanwhile, in the Northern Crescent Kingdom Alpha, King Kale was beginning to experience the consequences of his decision. At first, he convinced himself that sending Aria away had been necessary. He told the council that he had protected the kingdom from a potential traitor. He repeated Celine's accusations until they almost sounded like truth. But every night when the palace became silent, Kale remembered the look in Aria's eyes before she was taken away. It was not the look of someone guilty. It was the look of someone who had lost faith in the person she loved most. That memory haunted him. The worst part was not that he missed her. The worst part was that he was beginning to doubt himself. When Kale visited the chamber where Aria had once lived, he found a small wooden box she had left behind. Inside were letters she had written during their years together, notes about villages she wanted to help, and plans for improving the lives of ordinary wolves. There were no secrets, no evidence of betrayal, no hidden plans against the kingdom, only the dreams of a woman who wanted to make their world better. Kale held one of the letters in his hands and felt something inside him break. For the first time, he questioned everything. If Aria truly betrayed him, why had she never once tried to defend herself with the information she possessed? If she wanted power, why had she never used her popularity among the people against him? If she wanted the throne, why had she walked away silently when she could have exposed every weakness inside the royal court? The answer terrified him, because perhaps the woman he destroyed had been innocent. But before Kale could investigate further, Celine arrived at his chamber. She immediately noticed the change in his expression and understood that his certainty was weakening. "You cannot allow yourself to feel guilty," Celine said coldly. "A king who regrets his own decisions is a weak king." Kale looked at her sharply. "Do you know something about the evidence against Aria?" For a brief moment, Celine's confidence disappeared, only for a second. But Kale noticed. That single moment created a crack that could no longer be ignored. Celine quickly recovered and accused Aria of manipulating him even after exile. She claimed Aria had somehow convinced him to feel guilty. She reminded him of the enemies waiting beyond their borders. She reminded him that a king could not afford emotions. But her words no longer had the same power, because Kale had started remembering the truth. He had once chosen Aria because she was different from everyone around him, and now he had become the very person who destroyed that difference. Far away from the Northern Crescent Kingdom, Aria began training under the guidance of Lycan warriors. She was weak after her exile, but she refused to remain broken. She learned the fighting techniques of the ancient Lycan guardians, studied royal history, and discovered abilities hidden within her bloodline. The silver mark on her shoulder was not simply a symbol. It was connected to an ancient power that responded to her emotions and her connection with the moon goddess. However, Raven warned her that power alone would not save her. A ruler who seeks strength only because they were hurt will eventually become another tyrant, he told her during one training session in the mountains. Aria looked at him with surprise. "Then why did you become powerful?" Raven remained silent for a moment, because behind his cold reputation was a painful history of his own. Years ago, Raven had also been betrayed by those closest to him. His own family had attempted to control him because of his power. His enemies had destroyed everything he loved because they feared what he could become. Unlike Aria, he survived by closing his heart completely. He became the ruthless emperor everyone feared because he believed emotions were weaknesses. But meeting Aria challenged everything he believed. She had lost everything and still refused to become cruel. She had every reason to hate the world, yet she continued helping others. That was something Raven could not understand. "You are different from the stories," Aria finally said. "So are you?" Raven answered. For the first time since Kyle broke their bond, Aria allowed herself to smile. It was small, almost invisible, but Raven noticed. And he realized that the woman standing before him was not someone waiting to be saved. She was someone who had survived the impossible. Weeks passed, and the relationship between Aria and Raven slowly changed. It was not the intense, overwhelming connection she once felt with Kyle. It was something quieter. Something built from respect, patience, and trust. Raven never promised her a perfect world. He only promised that he would never force her to become someone she was not. One night during a ceremony beneath the full moon, the moon priestess of the Lycan Empire revealed a shocking truth. "The mate bond you lost was never the end of your destiny." The words echoed through the temple. Aria looked at the priestess in confusion. "What do you mean?" The priestess touched the ancient symbol on Aria's shoulder. "The moon goddess does not choose only one path." Sometimes she allows a soul to be broken because something greater is waiting beyond the pain. Aria's heart stopped for a moment. Could it be possible that her suffering had not been a punishment? Could it be that losing Kale was not the end of her story? Before she could ask more, a messenger arrived from the Northern Crescent Kingdom with urgent news. The kingdom was facing a new crisis. Enemy forces had attacked their borders. The people were suffering, and the Alpha King, who had abandoned his Luna, was losing control. The messenger bowed before Raven and delivered the message. The Northern Crescent Kingdom requests the help of the Lycan Empire. Silence filled the temple. Aria looked toward the distant mountains, knowing that the place she once called home was now calling for help from the very person they had abandoned. Raven looked at her carefully. "You do not have to return." Aria closed her eyes. For a long time she imagined the day she would stand before Kale again. She imagined anger. She imagined revenge. But now, standing beside the man who gave her a second chance, she felt something unexpected. "Peace. I will return," Aria finally said. "Not because I forgive them. Not because I want my old life back." She looked at the moon above them. "I will return because I am no longer the woman they sent away." The next morning, the banners of the Lycan Empire moved toward the Northern Crescent Kingdom, and for the first time in history, the world would witness the return of the woman who was supposed to die. The Luna who was rejected. The woman whose bond was destroyed. The forgotten daughter of the moon goddess. Aria Vale was coming home. But this time she would not arrive as a powerless girl begging to be accepted. She would return as the woman who could decide the fate of every kingdom. The gates of the Northern Crescent Kingdom had not opened for Aria Vale as a beloved Luna returning home. They opened for her as a ruler from another empire, a woman who had once been thrown away like a worthless possession and now arrived beneath the banner of the most feared kingdom in the world. The same warriors who had watched her walk into exile with broken chains around her wrists now stood frozen beside the city walls, unable to recognize the woman standing at the center of the Lycan army. She wore an elegant silver cloak embroidered with ancient moon symbols. Her posture carried the quiet confidence of someone who had survived the darkest moment of her life, and beside her stood Raven Draven, the Lycan Emperor, whose name alone had forced countless enemies to surrender before battle even began. The people who once believed Aria would die in the Black Wolf Valley were now witnessing her return as someone far beyond the title they had taken away from her. The news of her arrival spread throughout the kingdom like a storm. Inside the royal palace, Alpha King Kale stood in the great hall where he had once destroyed their mate bond before thousands of witnesses. The same throne that had given him authority now felt heavier than ever before. He had imagined many times what would happen if Aria somehow survived. But none of his thoughts prepared him for this moment. He expected anger, hatred, perhaps a woman consumed by revenge. Instead, the person who entered the hall carried a calmness that frightened him more than rage ever could. Aria did not return seeking approval from the people who rejected her. She did not return to ask for her old position back. She returned because the kingdom she once loved was suffering, and despite everything they had done to her, she could not ignore the cries of innocent wolves. The court that had once whispered against her became completely silent as she walked through the palace doors. The elders who had called her unworthy lowered their eyes, remembering every cruel word they had spoken. The warriors who had believed the accusations against her felt shame when they saw the woman they abandoned standing stronger than ever before. However, Aria did not look at them with hatred. She simply looked at them with the understanding of someone who had already moved beyond their judgment. She had spent too much time fighting for survival to waste her new life chasing the approval of people who had already shown their true hearts. The greatest victory was not making her enemies suffer. The greatest victory was proving that their betrayal had not destroyed the person she was. Kale watched her carefully, searching for the woman he remembered. He expected to see the girl who once looked at him with endless trust. The woman who believed his promises beneath the full moon, the Luna, who would smile whenever he returned from battle. But the person standing before him was different. The kindness remained, but the innocence had changed into wisdom. The softness remained, but it was now protected by strength. Kyle finally understood the cruel truth that haunted him every night since her disappearance. He had not only lost his destined mate, he had destroyed the only person who had truly loved him without wanting anything from his crown. When Aria and Kale finally stood face to face again, the entire hall held its breath. No one dared interrupt the silence between them, because everyone understood that this was not simply a meeting between an Alpha King and an exiled Luna. This was the confrontation between a man who had chosen power over love and the woman who had discovered her worth after losing everything. Kale wanted to speak, but every apology that came to his mind felt too small compared to the pain he had caused. How could words repair a bond he had personally destroyed? How could he ask forgiveness from someone he had condemned without hearing her side of the story? "I know what you want to say," Aria finally spoke, her voice calm but carrying the strength of someone who no longer needed to prove herself. "You want to explain why you did what you did. You want to tell me that you were protecting the kingdom, that you had no choice, that others influenced your decisions. But there is one thing you must understand, Kale. A person can be forced to make difficult choices, but they are still responsible for the wounds those choices create." Her words struck deeper than any weapon, because they were true. Kyle lowered his gaze for the first time in front of his entire court. The Alpha King, who had commanded thousands of warriors, could not defend himself against the quiet truth spoken by the woman he had betrayed. However, before Kale could respond, an urgent message arrived from the northern border. Enemy forces had launched another attack and the kingdom's defenses were collapsing. The same crisis that had forced them to seek help from the Lycan Empire had grown worse. The royal army was exhausted. The people were losing hope. And the kingdom that once believed it could survive through pride alone was finally facing the consequences of years of corruption within its leadership. The council immediately turned toward Raven. They knew the Lycan Emperor possessed the power to save them. But they also knew the price of asking for his help. The elders who once looked down on Aria now had no choice but to stand before the woman they rejected and request her mercy. The situation was almost impossible to accept for those who valued pride above humility. The same people who had sent her to die were now depending on her to survive. Raven remained silent throughout the discussion, allowing Aria to decide. This was something everyone noticed. Unlike Kale, who had once claimed to protect her while controlling her choices, Raven trusted her judgment completely. He did not speak for her. He did not use his power to force an outcome. He simply stood beside her, allowing the world to see that a true partner did not need to dominate another person to prove strength. That difference changed the way many wolves viewed the Lycan Emperor. The man they called a monster was showing more respect than the king they had followed for years. Aria looked at the map of the battlefield and listened carefully to the reports. She knew the kingdom had suffered because of the decisions made by its rulers. She knew many of those suffering wolves were the same ones who had believed the lies about her. Yet she also knew innocent lives should never pay for the mistakes of those in power. "I will help," Aria finally said. The hall erupted with surprise. Kyle looked at her in disbelief. "You would save the kingdom after what we did to you." Aria turned toward him, her expression neither cold nor forgiving. "I am saving the people, not the pride of those who betrayed me." Those words became the first moment many realized the difference between a true Luna and someone who only carried the title. A Luna was not defined by a crown. She was defined by the heart she carried when she had every reason to abandon everyone. As the Lycan and Wolf armies prepared for battle, hidden enemies inside the palace began to panic. Selene watched from the shadows, realizing that the woman she believed was gone forever had returned with even greater power than before. The carefully created lies that had protected her for years were beginning to collapse. Every secret she buried, every manipulation she created, and every person she used to achieve her ambition was now becoming a chain that would eventually drag her down. But Selene was not ready to surrender. She still possessed one final secret. A secret connected to the destruction of Aria and Kale's mate bond. A secret that, if revealed, could change the entire history of the Wolf Kingdoms. And as the armies prepared for war beneath the darkening sky, the truth hidden for years was finally moving toward the surface. Because the greatest battle was not only happening on the battlefield, it was happening inside the hearts of those who had chosen betrayal over loyalty. And soon everyone would discover that the woman they tried to erase from history was the only person capable of saving them all. The battlefield outside the Northern Crescent Kingdom became the place where the past and present finally collided. For years, Aria had been remembered by many as a fallen Luna, a woman whose name was associated with betrayal and disgrace because of the lies spread by those who feared her existence. But now, as she stood beside the Lycan Emperor and led warriors into battle, the world was forced to see the truth that had been hidden beneath years of deception. She was not a traitor. She was not a weak woman who needed protection. She was the person who had survived the cruelty of those who should have defended her and returned with the strength to protect even the people who had abandoned her. The battlefield was filled with the sound of weapons, the roar of wolves, and the ancient power of Lycans, but above all of it was the presence of a woman who had transformed her suffering into courage. Raven fought beside Aria, but he never attempted to overshadow her. The warriors of the Lycan Empire had expected their emperor to lead from the front as he always did, crushing enemies with overwhelming power. Instead, they witnessed something different. Raven trusted Aria's decisions. He listened to her strategies, followed her commands, and allowed the entire army to see that their alliance was not based on one ruler controlling another. It was based on two powerful individuals respecting each other's strengths. Many soldiers who had grown up believing that power meant domination began to understand a different kind of strength. A true ruler did not need to stand above everyone else. Sometimes the greatest leader was the one who knew when to stand beside another person. As the battle continued, Aria discovered that the enemy forces were not only attacking from outside the borders. There were traitors within the kingdom who had opened the gates and allowed the invasion to happen. This revelation confirmed what she had always suspected. The destruction of her mate bond and the accusations against her had never been isolated events. They were part of a much larger plan designed to weaken the kingdom and control the throne. The same people who had convinced Kale that Aria was dangerous had been working secretly to destroy the entire royal structure from within. When the evidence reached the royal council, the atmosphere inside the palace changed completely. The old elders who had once spoken with absolute confidence began questioning everything. The documents they had used to condemn Aria were revealed to be manipulated. The witnesses who had accused her were exposed as people connected to Celine's faction. Every lie that had been carefully constructed over years started collapsing one piece at a time. Kale stood silently as the truth was presented before him. For the first time, he saw the full scale of his mistake. He had not only betrayed Aria, he had allowed himself to become a weapon used by people who never cared about him. The realization destroyed the last illusion he had protected inside his heart. He had convinced himself that he sacrificed his love for the sake of his kingdom, but the truth was far more painful. He had sacrificed the person who loved him because he was too afraid to question the voices around him. He had trusted ambition, fear, and manipulation more than the woman who had always proven her loyalty through actions. Meanwhile, Celine's desperation grew stronger. She understood that the truth would soon expose everything she had done. She could not allow Aria to stand before the people and reveal the past. If Aria spoke openly about the hidden conspiracy, Celine would lose everything, including her influence over the nobles who had supported her, so she made her final move. During a royal ceremony meant to celebrate the temporary victory against the enemy forces, Celine attempted to activate an ancient forbidden ritual hidden beneath the palace. She believed that if she could steal the power connected to Aria's moon mark, she would finally become the chosen Luna the world had denied her. For years, she had believed that power and status were the only things that mattered. She believed being loved by the kingdom was more important than being loved sincerely. But she never understood the difference between possessing a title and deserving it. When Aria entered the underground chamber beneath the palace, she discovered Celine surrounded by dark magic and ancient symbols. The same woman who had once smiled beside Kale while watching Aria being humiliated now stood desperate and consumed by her own ambition. "You took everything from me," Celine said, her voice filled with anger and jealousy. "You were born with a blessing you never earned. You had the bond, the respect, and the love of the people without fighting for it." Aria looked at her quietly. "You believe I was given everything easily because you only saw the moments when I was standing. You never saw the nights when I cried alone because everyone told me I was not enough. You never saw the sacrifices I made when no one was watching." Celine refused to listen, because accepting the truth meant accepting that her entire life had been built on envy. She attacked Aria with the stolen power of the forbidden ritual, believing strength alone would guarantee victory. But the moon mark on Aria's shoulder responded differently. It did not awaken because of hatred or revenge. It awakened because Aria was protecting others, even in a moment when she had every reason to fight only for herself. The ancient energy of the moon goddess filled the chamber. Celine's dark power began weakening. For the first time, she realized the reason she could never replace Aria. It was not because Aria was stronger. It was because Aria possessed something Celine could never steal: a heart that remained pure despite suffering. At that moment, Raven arrived with the royal guards, and Kale followed behind him. The Alpha King witnessed the final proof of Celine's betrayal. He saw the woman he had trusted standing with forbidden magic, ready to destroy the person he had once sworn to protect. The silence that followed was heavier than any battle. Kyle looked at Celine, the woman who had stood beside his throne, and then looked at Aria, the woman he had cast away. The contrast was unbearable. One had manipulated him to gain power. The other had forgiven people who had hurt her to save innocent lives. Kale finally understood what he had lost. But understanding came too late. Aria, Kyle whispered, his voice broken. I was wrong. Those simple words carried years of regret. But Aria did not immediately answer, because forgiveness was not the same as forgetting. She had spent too long rebuilding herself to return to the person she was before. I believe you regret what happened, Aria said calmly, but regret does not erase the pain you caused. Some wounds teach us lessons that we must carry forever. Kale lowered his head. For the first time, the Alpha King accepted that the woman he lost was not waiting for him to return. She had already moved forward. The battle for the kingdom was ending, but another truth was about to be revealed. The Moon Priestess arrived carrying an ancient scroll that had been hidden for centuries. The writing on the scroll explained the true reason the mate bond between Aria and Kale had been destroyed. It was not because Aria betrayed him. It was not because she was unworthy. It was because their bond had been manipulated by an ancient curse created by enemies who feared the rise of the Moon bloodline. The destruction of the bond was not the end of Aria's destiny. It was the moment her true destiny began. The entire kingdom learned that the woman they had condemned was actually the last descendant of the original Luna bloodline, the one chosen by the moon goddess to bring unity between wolves and Lycans. The same people who had rejected her now had to face the truth. They had tried to destroy the person who was meant to save them. And as Aria stood beneath the moonlight beside Raven, the entire world finally understood that her exile had not been a punishment. It had been her rebirth. The morning after the final battle, the Northern Crescent Kingdom stood beneath a sky that felt strangely peaceful after years of darkness and deception. The walls of the ancient palace still carried the scars of war. The banners of defeated enemies had been removed from the towers, and the people who gathered in the royal square no longer looked toward the throne with blind admiration. They looked toward the woman standing beneath the silver light of the moon, the woman they had once condemned without understanding. And they finally recognized the truth that had been hidden from them. Aria Vale was not the fallen Luna they had been told about. She was not the traitor who endangered their kingdom. She was the woman who had survived betrayal, discovered her forgotten heritage, and returned not to destroy the world that had hurt her, but to heal it. The royal court that once judged her now stood before her in silence. The elders who had spoken against her lowered their heads, unable to deny the evidence revealed before everyone. Their pride had prevented them from seeing the truth because they believed status determined worth. They believed a woman from a border family could never carry the dignity of a true Luna. But now they understood the mistake they had made. A crown did not create greatness. A title did not create loyalty. Power did not create honor. The qualities they had searched for in noble bloodlines had always existed in the woman they rejected. Aria stood beside Raven Draven, the Lycan Emperor, who had given her something no one else had offered during her darkest days, a choice. He had not saved her so that she would become dependent on him. He had protected her until she remembered that she was capable of saving herself. Their bond was not created through obligation or prophecy alone. It was built through trust, respect, and the understanding that true love did not require one person to own another. For the first time in her life, Aria experienced a relationship where she did not have to prove that she deserved to be loved. The Moon Priestess stepped forward, carrying the ancient scroll that contained the complete prophecy of the Moon bloodline. Her voice echoed across the gathering as she revealed the final truth that had been hidden for generations. The woman chosen by the moon goddess was never meant to remain beside the first person who discovered her. Destiny was not a chain that forced two souls together forever. Destiny was a path that tested the hearts of those who walked upon it. Aria's first bond had shown her the pain of love without trust. Her second chance had shown her the strength of love built upon understanding. Everyone turned toward Kale. The former Alpha King stood alone near the throne that had once represented everything he valued. He was still powerful, still respected as a warrior, but something inside him had changed forever. The arrogance that once surrounded him had disappeared. The man who believed losing Aria was a necessary sacrifice now understood that he had sacrificed the one thing that made him worthy of his crown. Kyle approached Aria slowly. For a moment the entire kingdom became silent. "I spent so much time believing that protecting my throne meant protecting my people," Kyle said, his voice carrying the weight of his regret. "But I was blind. I protected my position while destroying the person who would have stood beside me through anything. I listened to those who wanted power and ignored the person who gave me loyalty without asking for anything." Aria looked at him calmly. Years ago, those words would have been everything she wanted to hear. Years ago, she would have forgiven him immediately because her love for him was stronger than her pain. But she was no longer that woman. "I do not hate you, Kale," she answered, "because hatred would mean you still control a part of my heart. I have already taken that part of myself back. But forgiveness does not mean returning to the past. Some choices change the future forever." Kale closed his eyes, accepting the truth. He had hoped that saving the kingdom might somehow repair what he broke. He had hoped that proving his regret could bring back the woman he lost. But some bridges once destroyed could not be rebuilt in the same way. The greatest punishment for his betrayal was not losing the throne. It was knowing that the person who loved him most had learned to live without him. Meanwhile, Selene faced judgment before all the clans. The evidence against her was undeniable. The forbidden rituals, the manipulation of the royal council, the false accusations against Aria, and the attempt to steal the moon mark revealed the depth of her ambition. Yet what shocked many people was not only what she had done, but why she had done it. Selene had spent her entire life believing that being powerful would finally make her worthy of love. She had confused fear with respect. She had confused possession with affection. She had believed that if she stood on the highest throne, no one would ever look down on her again. But in the end, the throne gave her nothing, because a person who destroys everyone around them eventually stands alone. As Selene was taken away, Aria watched quietly. Many expected her to demand the harshest punishment. They expected revenge from the woman who had suffered the most. But Aria only asked that justice be carried out according to the laws of the kingdoms. She refused to become the same kind of person who had hurt her. That decision surprised everyone, especially Raven. Later that evening, as the moon rose above the restored palace, Raven found Aria standing near the ancient lake where generations of Luna Queens had once made their vows. The reflection of the moon shimmered across the water, creating the same peaceful image that had once surrounded Aria and Kyle when they believed their love would last forever. But this time was different. This time, Aria was not standing there as someone waiting for another person to choose her. She was standing there as someone who had chosen herself. Raven approached quietly. "You could have taken everything from them," he said. "The throne, the kingdom, their loyalty. After what they did, no one would have blamed you." Aria looked at the moon above them. "I thought about revenge many times," she admitted. "When I was walking through the Black Wolf Valley, when I believed I would die alone, when I remembered the moment Kyle destroyed our bond. I wanted them to feel the same pain I felt." She paused before continuing. "But then I realized something. If I allowed their cruelty to change who I was, then they would have won twice. First, they took my past. Then they would have taken my heart." Raven smiled softly. That was the moment he understood why the moon goddess had chosen her. Not because she was the strongest warrior, not because she carried ancient blood, but because she possessed the rarest strength of all, the ability to remain kind without remaining weak. Months later, the kingdoms changed forever. The alliance between the Lycan Empire and the Wolf clans created a new era of peace. The old traditions that judged people by their birth were replaced by laws that valued loyalty and character. Wolves from smaller families were given opportunities they had never received before. The people remembered the story of Aria not as the Luna who was rejected, but as the woman who returned after losing everything and chose compassion over revenge. Under the guidance of Aria and Raven, the divided kingdoms began healing. The world that once called Raven a monster discovered that even the coldest heart could learn love. The world that once called Aria insignificant discovered that true greatness was never measured by where someone came from. And beneath the eternal moonlight, the two rulers stood together, not because prophecy forced them, not because kingdoms demanded it, but because they chose each other freely. Aria had once been a woman abandoned on the road of death. She became a queen who united nations. She had once been a Luna whose bond was destroyed before the eyes of thousands. She became the symbol of a new beginning. Her story became a reminder passed from generation to generation: never judge someone by the place where they begin. Never believe power is greater than loyalty. Never destroy a sincere heart for temporary ambition. Because sometimes the person you throw away today is the person who could have saved you tomorrow. And sometimes the greatest rebirth begins at the exact moment when the world believes you have already fallen.